Hello guys, welcome to my channel Criminally Insane. Today I'm going to talk about a person who perfectly fits the category of a psychopath. It's Dennis Nilsen. He's a serial killer, necrophile, and to a certain extent also a pedophile. If you are sensitive to such topics, please click away as it gets more disturbing further on. So let's talk about Dennis Nilsen. Dennis Andrew Nilsen was born on 23rd November 1945 in Fraserburgh, Aberdeenshire. He was the second child out of three children. His father, Olav Magnus Mokshem, was a Norwegian soldier, and mother Elizabeth Duth White, a simple housewife. Their marriage had already begun to tumble down as they used to fight frequently. This would have been one of the incidents where it affected Dennis mentally. Growing up, Dennis was a loner and had problems talking to people, though he was particularly close with his sister Sylvia. The couple finally divorced and Elizabeth moved into her parents' house. Even though Elizabeth's father Andrew did not support the marriage from the beginning, he allowed her and the kids to stay with them. This is where Dennis finds his first closest friend, Andrew, his grandfather. They used to go on long-hour countryside walks, and at times Dennis described his grandfather to be his hero and a protector. Whenever Andrew went out to work as a fisherman, Dennis would describe those moments as quote-unquote, life would be empty until he returned. It's 1951 and Andrew is very sick. Despite his unwellness, he kept on working and pushing his limits. Finally, Andrew passed away on 31st October 1951 while fishing in the North Sea. It was the heart attack that killed him at the age of 62. Prior to burial, Dennis' mother weepingly asked whether he wanted to see his beloved grandpa. Dennis nodded and Elizabeth took him to a room where Andrew laid in an open coffin. Of course, being a 7-year-old kid, Dennis didn't know the meaning of death. He just kept staring at his grandpa. This might have been the moment where Dennis developed a weird fantasy of watching unconscious bodies and kind of feeling emotionally and sexually gratified. After the death of grandfather, Nilsen retreated from any attempts to talk with other family members. He became more quiet and withdrawn, often going on lonely walks on the beach. Once he frequently visited with his grandpa. Nilsen began to show a psychotic side when he willingly submerged into the water, but the feet was still touching the ground. He wanted to simulate the act of drowning. Though in 1954, in one of his simulations, he was actually dragged out by the tides. Now, drowning turned into reality. He was saved by one of the locality who was also taking a walk that day. Nilsen recalled vividly that his grandpa had come back and saved him from drowning. In 1955, Elizabeth, along with other children, moved to Sutton with her new husband, Andrew Scott. With him, she had 4 more children. Once Nilsen hit puberty, he found out that he was gay, but he never accepted his sexuality. This was because homosexuality was not welcomed in the society and was always ridiculed by others during those times. He even fondled his sister Sylvia, an act of sexually touching in order to wash away and believing that he liked girls. Once in school, he told that he was sexually assaulted by one of his older peers, but he felt the experience quote-unquote not unpleasant. On one occasion, Nilsen caressed and fondled his older brother Olav Jr. when he slept. Due to this incident, Olav Jr. began to suspect his brother being gay and openly called him as hen, which in Scottish dialect means girl. Nilsen got bored of his lifestyle. He wanted to escape the poverty his family faced. So at the age of 14, he joined army. Dennis Nilsen had an higher IQ. He excelled in history and art, but was bad in sports. He easily passed the entrance examination for working as a chef in Army Catering Corps at Hampshire. Nilsen described his 3 years training at Aldershot quote-unquote the happiest of his life. But Nilsen's feeling to want a male partner began to stir, but he managed to keep it a secret. He never showered in the company of fellow soldiers where they just had one common bathroom to share. Instead, Nilsen waited till he was alone. In 1964, when Nilsen was serving as a private, he started to drink a lot. He almost always drank to the point of stupor. His colleagues described him as a hard-working boozy lot, where he worked hard during days and boozed all night. Once when him and a German youth drank themselves to stupor only to discover next day that Nilsen was in that youth's flat. Nothing had happened, but this incident triggered another Nilsen's fantasies where he would lie unconscious and someone would take advantage of him. He experimented this with his fellow soldiers. He would drink and act like he had no sense and follow towards other guy's room where they would pass out on the sofa. But not even once was Nilsen had experience of taken advantage of. He ended his 11 years of military service at the rank of corporal in October 1972 and returned home. One evening, Nilsen joined his older brother, his sister-in-law and other members of the family to watch a documentary about gay men rights. All hated the theme of the documentary except Nilsen. Nilsen rose his voice against them. This was the point where Olaf Jr. told his mother that Nilsen was gay. Family dispute occurred which made Nilsen move out of the house. He never talked to his older brother and then on only maintained a formal letter exchange between his mother, stepfather and his sister Sivilia. Dennis Nilsen joined as a Metropolitan Police where he moved to London on December 1972. This is the city where his killing spree began and ended. He joined the police force because he loved to take control of things entirely by himself. He wanted to play the dominant role to others. Now free from his family ties and London was more lenient towards homosexuality, he frequently started to visit gay bars where he would seek out partners for one night stand. But Nilsen described these encounters as quote-unquote soul-destroying. He was looking for a permanent partner, which he failed to find. That same month his biological father died, leaving Nilsen with £1,000. Nilsen could not find any particular interest working as a junior constable, so he resigned and joined as a security guard. He kept on changing jobs until he found peace working as a civil servant in Denmark Street. His role was to find employment for unskilled laborers. November 1975 rolled around. Nilsen was alone, always binge drinking in the evenings, visiting bars and clubs, failing to find his soulmate. This was the time he encountered a 20-year-old David Gallican. He was outside the bar being threatened by two men. Nilsen immediately intervened and took Gallican to his apartment, which was at Cricklewood district of North London. Nilsen learned that Gallican was gay, unemployed and homeless. Taking this opportunity, Nilsen asked Gallican to move in with him. He immediately agreed under the given circumstance. They needed a bigger flat, so that's when Nilsen used his father's inherited money and bought the ground floor flat at 195 Melrose Avenue. The pair moved in and things seemed to be alright for over a year. Then it started to spiral down again. They would often engage in arguments. Both men bought casual partners to the house and their care for one another was about to hit the roadblock. Finally, the relationship ended and on May 1977, Nilsen asked Gallican to move out of his house, which he did. For next 18 months, Nilsen kept on having these short-term, no-string-attached relationships in hopes of finding a permanent partner. He was not successful. To distract from this, he worked long hours and increased his alcohol intakes. This is the point where Nilsen's sanity starts to break. It was the loneliness and increased habit of boozing that got better of him. He started thinking other ways of keeping his future partners, whether they liked it or not. Stefan Holmes was a 14-year-old boy. He was outside the bar and failed to buy himself some alcohol. Seeing this, Nilsen invited him home in promise of giving him 2 alcohol bottles and some music. Excited, Holmes went along with it, giving it no second thoughts. Nilsen confessed later on that he thought Holmes was a 17-year-old teenager. At Melrose Avenue, both of them drank to their content and passed out till the next morning. First to wake up was Nilsen. Looking at Holmes' unconscious body, he decided that Holmes would stay with him, with his consent or not. So Nilsen reached for the necktie and strangled Holmes. Then Nilsen carried his body and dipped his head in a bucket of water, killing him by drowning. Nilsen kept Holmes' body on his bed, sometimes sleeping with it, bathing it, and sometimes even performing sexual acts on the body. He used the body for his own pleasure, and soon when the body started to decompose, he stuffed the body under the floorboards, which consequently attracted flies and maggots. making house smell bad. After 8 months, he then took the body and set it on bonfire behind his house where there was a spacious garden, this way eliminating all the evidence. This was a common practice for Nilsen whenever he bought a partner to his Melrose Avenue apartment. On 11th October 1979, Nilsen invited a student from Hong Kong named Andrew Ho. He was lured in promise of sex. Once inside, Nilsen started to strangle him, but Ho fought Nilsen and got away, reporting to the police. If the police would have considered this as a danger, there wouldn't have been future murders. Cops thought this was just a lover's feud and let Nilsen go free of any charges. After a failed attempt to kill Andrew Ho, Nilsen met up with a 23-year-old Canadian student, Kenneth Okedenon. He lured him as same way as before with more meals and drinks. When Kenneth was listening to Nilsen's headphone, Nilsen used the cord of the headphone to strangle Kenneth. This time he didn't drown the youth in the water, as he managed to kill him off by strangling. On many instances of killing, Nilsen was always drunk and almost had no memories what he had done that night. At least that's what he said in the confession. Next day he bought a Polaroid camera and placing Kenneth's body on bed with various suggestive positions, he clicked the photos. In the same manner as before, he placed the body under the floorboard and took out whenever he needed. Sometimes he uses the body for sexual activities, other times he just places the body on the armchair alongside him while he watched television and drank alcohol. The third victim of Nilsen was just 16 years old, Martin Duffey. He noticed Martin sleeping in the Euston railway station. It was 17th of May 1980. Nilsen once again invited him to his house for a free meal and a night to sleep. Martin happily accepted the offer. In the Nilsen's apartment, when Martin was asleep, he tied his tie around Martin's neck and suffocated him till he was unconscious. Then he took the youth to the kitchen and used the sink to drown him. Only this time he stuffed Martin's body in the cupboard. But when the body started to bloat, he placed it back where every body used to belong, under the floorboard. Before 1980 ended, Nilsen had killed 5 more victims, out of which only one was identified, a 26-year-old William David Sutherland. The reason for this was Nilsen would be drunk to such an extent that he wouldn't remember his actions and memories of actually killing partners. All he remembered is him waking up next to a body every morning. At this point, it has become an addiction for Nilsen to kill and stuff the bodies under floorboard, and he doesn't even give a reason for the killings. The bodies he had been collecting since 1979 under floorboard was rotting to such an extent that his entire house is covered with bad odor, with flies laying eggs on corpses, making it look disgusting. Like always, he created bonfire to get rid of the bodies and smash away visible bones to pieces. The final victim to be murdered at 195 Melrose Avenue was a 23-year-old Malcolm Baralo. This guy was sleeping outside the house of Nilsen. He had a weak leg due to an episode of epilepsy, and Nilsen invited him in. To many people's surprise, he didn't kill the guy. He called an ambulance where a medic took the guy for the treatment. This is a key to understanding when and why he kills people. Whenever he is in a drunken state, he loses his mind and switches to a psycho person. It's like he had this dual personality. Unfortunately, that man from hospital returned to thank Nilsen and was invited for a drink. As same as always, Nilsen strangled the guy and stuffed his body under the kitchen sink. In mid-1981, Nilsen's landlord wanted to renovate 195 Melrose Avenue, the apartment Nilsen was living in. He was hesitant but later on willingly moved when landlord offered him £1,000. At this point, Nilsen should have been caught, but the landlord of Nilsen's did not find any suspicious things in the house after he left. I actually thought there would be blood stains or insects everywhere, or even the horrible stench, but the landlord did not report anything. Dennis Nilsen moved into 23 Cranley Gardens. For almost 2 months, he did not kill anyone, as the place he was living was too small to hide bodies and no garden to burn. Although his emotions tried to overtake his actions when he tried to strangle a 19-year-old student, Paul Nobbs, on 23rd November 1981. But he stopped and let him go. Again, no assault was registered by the cops. In March 1982, Nilsen encountered a 23-year-old John Howlett drinking in a pub located near Leicester Square. The victim was again lured into the flat with more alcohol. There, Nilsen and John spent watching movies and drinking. John fell asleep on Nilsen's bed. Watching John's body, he then started to strangle him. Nilsen kept on failing as he was snapping back to reality and was confused whether to kill him or not. Finally, he drowned John in a bucket of water, ending his life. Now his attempt to murder started to get frequent again. Not even 2 months later, he invited Karl Stotter to his flat. He was a depressed young man and was going through a failed relationship at that time. Stotter fell asleep in a sleeping bag which Nilsen had given him. During midnight, Stotter woke up struggling to breathe with Nilsen sitting upon him. What Stotter thought was Nilsen was trying to unzip the bag, which made him suffocate. In actuality, Nilsen was trying to strangle Stotter with the zipper. At this point, Stotter loses consciousness and wakes up later on to the coldness of water. Nilsen was now trying to drown him in the bathtub. Later on in Stotter's testimony, he didn't file an assault charge on Nilsen because his memory of that night was broken and he still believed that Nilsen was trying to save him. Karl Stotter was lucky to walk away from Nilsen's flat but not his next victim, a 27-year-old Graham Allen. On June 1982, Nilsen gave a lift to this young man and promised him some meals in his apartment. Again, he strangled Allen and stored him in his bathtub. Nilsen's final victim was 23-year-old Stefan Sinclair. He was sleeping on Nilsen's armchair in a drug and alcohol-induced stupor when Nilsen approached him with a necktie and strangled Sinclair to death. His final killing was recorded on 26 January 1983. Every victim he had killed in Cranley Gardens were dissected after a few days, storing various body parts either in wardrobe, a tea chest, or within drawers located beneath the bathtub. He then tried to dispose smaller flesh, internal organs, and smaller bones down the toilet. Nilsen boiled the heads, hands, and feet to melt away the flesh that was present inside. On February 8, 1983, tenants of Cranley Garden complained about the drain blockage, and one of the Dino Rod employee investigated the pipe that was giving trouble. He finds chunks of raw meat and pieces of bones. Later, when the employee and the landlord returned the next day to check on the pipe, they find the place to be cleared and no flesh or bones was found. They find this suspicious and ventures inside the pipe. They find again a piece of bones, indicating that it belonged to hand once. They lodge a complaint. The cops came in and discovered the pipe led to the top flat where Nilsen was residing. When the officers entered his place, it smelled like a strong odor of rotting flesh. They questioned Nilsen about the possibility of human flesh. Nilsen acted shocked, saying, quote unquote, "Good grief, how awful." In response, an officer quoted, "Don't mess about, where's the rest of the body?" Surprisingly, Nilsen replied calmly, admitting to the remains of the body. When he was in the cop's car, when one of the officers questioned whether he had killed one or two, Nilsen, looking outside the window, replied, "It's 15 or 16.